that, I would say, well, cybernetics isn't spelled with X. How nice. This is tall. This is taller than I remembered. It's so lovely to be here with you today on this marvelous Mother's Day. Yes, we are having our June sun a little early this year. When someone suggested the topic for May was pluralism and that I was going to speak on Mother's Day, I was kind of a little bit, what do I do with that? Right? And then I realized, and it's in the write-up that some of you may have gotten, is that there's this part of mothering, we focus on the archetype, which I will do more of, that idea of being nurturing and held and supported, and as Khalil Gibran says, and shot out into the world. But there's also this other piece that women and mothers are responsible for. And I remember when I was a freshman in the college dorm, and I was very upset because the girls had to be in by 10 and the boys could be out any old hours they wanted. And the girls had to dress up for Sunday meals, and the boys were showing up in their underwear, Yeah, oh yeah. And so I went and I complained to the counselor, and we ended up complaining to the women's dean, and we ended up changing some of those rules, thank heaven. But along the way, one of them said, well, that's because the women are the transmitters of the culture, and we need to make sure you're safe and kept secure. Wow. An interesting lesson to get at 17, right? But that idea that the mother is the space in which the culture is learned is absolutely right on, right? I mean, that's where the first language and the first, shoulds and shouldn'ts are laid on us, and all of that. And the first notions of what is normal are laid on us in that mothering experience that we have. Those expectations and the absolutes that happen in every single family. And there is the root of pluralism, right there. It has to do with what the mother is being, not what she's saying necessarily, but what she is being and doing in those first 6 years. Because in our culture, and in most of Western culture, that's the person that we are relating to most in those first 6 years. Yeah. Wow. So you can forgive yourself for a whole lot. And we are fortunate. We have very plastic brains, so we can move on. We're not stuck with those first years, even though the Jesuit line is, give me a boy till he's 7 and I've got him for life. Yep. So if we start looking at the archetype of mother, it's present in all of Western culture, what I have called empire culture in other places. And, it starts with that sense, the archetype of mother, not necessarily our mothers, okay? So give your mama a break here. So in the archetype of mother, we have a woman who is being of service, or it may be a masculine body choosing this archetype, right? To be of service, to create happiness for the people around, to provide a generous space, right? Be able to continue to nurture and provide regardless. So in fact, if we look back long before empire culture into the ancient, the mother is the figurative source of all life. We say our Mother Earth, right? Yeah, and if you've ever seen all those funny little clay figurines, right, that are, that the 30-year-old archaeologist guys from Britain called oddly exaggerated sexual figures. If you've ever sat around with a bunch of middle-aged women, you'll recognize it's got nothing to do with exaggeration. The mother has been the source of inspiration, support, and supply in human experience for hundreds of thousands of years. Regardless of the foibles of the individuals, regardless of the cultural norms, that has been peace. Yes. So that figurative understanding that life comes from and through the mother, and it's through more than from, has been part of the human experience from the beginning. Now, how we got to Mother's Day is a whole nother story. Well, before Hallmark, actually. So it turns out that at the end of the Civil War, there were women going, you know, we honor all the sacrifice the guys made, and no one is talking about the sacrifice the women made, you know, going without any man in the household, you know, having raised these boys to be really good men and have them become cannon fodder, and all of that, right? That was a lot of investment in those boys, and a lot of pain for a lot of women. And so there was a woman in West Virginia who got up and said, we're going to, in a Methodist church, we are going to honor the mothers who had to sacrifice for the Civil War. And then her daughter went on and said, as she was approaching World War I, we need to do the same thing for women during World War I. And she started doing a lot of politicizing. She was writing letters to everybody in sight, and was able to get someone to declare a particular Sunday, Mother's Day, and then someone else, and then someone else. And over about 20 years, she got the US government to proclaim the second Sunday of May to be Mother's Day. And I didn't write down her name. It flipped out of my head. I have it here, it's gone. So you can look that up, who invented Mother's Day. But she was able to convince Herbert Hoover, who established Mother's Day. Now, I have a few flowers here. I was supposed to get you carnations, because that's what she recommended. But by the time I got to Florence, there weren't any left in Florence. So we have these little mums here, daisy mums, and you're welcome to take a flower home. If you have ever nurtured anybody, so male, female, doesn't matter. If you've ever been the nurturing support for anybody, please take one of those home. I have some little ones out in the other room that we may see out later too, from the little ones. So the mother archetype, of course, was carried through even as the men took over and created the empire. And it turned out you couldn't be an emperor unless you were married to the woman who was representing the mother. So unless she was the priestess at Sibyl's temple or at Demeter's temple or Diana's temple or whatever, you could not be the guy in charge. And if you look at when the particular men inherited the office or were assigned the office of emperor in Rome, you can see that over and over again. And you know, David and Bathsheba were partly because Bathsheba was the means by which he could become the king of Israel. So even though the story is really awful about how it happened. So there's that realization that the source of power, and if some of you may recall that if you wanted anything from King Solomon, you had to talk to his mom. You'd have to talk to Bathsheba in order to get anything from Solomon. And that's part of that process that was normal then. So the temple in which the feminine, the divine feminine, was living and alive and being expressed through intuitive understandings and deep teachings and deep wisdom was a core part of this culture all the way to the industrial era. Wow. The Catholicism version of that is pray to Mother Mary, right? Say the rosary. The Mother Mary. She basically replaced throughout the Roman Empire, in the Roman Church, all of the previous forms of the Divine Mother. And literally, a lot of the names that were given to other forms were given to her to help make that happen. So it's a huge part of the culture that got buried along about the 1700s and thoroughly buried to the point where the only place the mother mattered was in the home. And part of the suffragette movement was to say, wait a minute, you know, we have something to contribute here from this understanding that this archetypal piece of beingness that we all have needs to be said out loud. That kind of understanding. One of the joys of this current period to live is that where it was separate but equal prior to empire, and then it was he's on top of her. Well, I didn't mean that, but what has begun to happen is this. And I see it in your marriages. I've watched this. It's been beautiful. I see it in our children and our grandchildren who are saying, I'm they, them. I'm not he or she, right? Or they're saying any number of things. Well, I think there's a big part of me that's a girl and I want to try that. Or I think there's a big part of me that's a boy and I'm doing that. Fortunately, we were able to get away with that when I was growing up, right? I got a few of those in this room. Right? Oh, my goodness. Isn't that marvelous? That we can be free to get in touch with the archetypal mother. I'm not here for Father's Day. We'll talk about that, someone else, that time. The archetypal father will be in us too. But today it's the mother. Regardless of whether we're male or female, regardless of whether we're young or old, regardless of whatever. I was the archetypal mom at 7. All right? So it's, you know, it's this empathy thing, you know? It's this compassion, it's this caring about making sure everyone has their needs met. I was taking care of all of my cousins from 7 to 14. So by the time I had my own kids, it was like, hi. It wasn't like, oh my God, what do I do? Right? All right. Now, there is the shadow side always to all these archetypes, right? You know, we're going along, we're being generous, we're being supportive, we're helping out, we're doing what we can, we're making sure everyone's got what they need, and someone says, oh good, I'll take a ride on that, right? And we don't even realize it until we're suddenly being very drained because we kind of lost sight of who and what we actually are. Now, one of the things in our version of the culture that is almost over, yes, is that women have been trained to be the mother archetype to the point where the rest of them got lost. Okay? We're almost through this. Okay, we've still got a few folks in the outlying 18% of fundamentalist Christians doing that. But in the rest of the world, we're not doing that. And what happens in that is you get to that stage in life where you go, oh my goodness, where am I in all of this? Who am I? What do I want? Is there an I? Right? I've been out there for them, for everyone, taking care of, following all the rules, doing all the shoulds, doing everything, meeting the expectations, and I don't think I can do it anymore. And that usually happens between 35 and 40, and I almost guarantee if you go back in your life history, somewhere between 35 and 40, you woke up. And you might have got real sick. I got real sick. I think Kate Middleton got real sick, the current Princess of Wales. She was so perfectly on target with the shoulds. And the body just went, whoops, no. You got to stop. You got to take care of you. You got to find out who you are. You got to be that, which includes both the archetypal mother and the archetypal daughter and the archetypal maiden and all these archetypes are in every female body, and it includes the archetypal father and the warrior and all of that. That's why there are goddesses like Diana and Athena, yeah, to remind us that there is all of that in all of us, yes? So that happens somewhere usually between 35 and 40. For my aunt, she was covered in hives for a year. Oh, it was awful, right, when she went through that. But that kind of thing happens, and it's wake up. How are you going to align your life so, yes, these people's needs are met, but it isn't only from you. It's through you and supporting you along the way. Oh. And one of the things I was taught at that time in my life was this healing modality called Reiki. And the thing about Reiki is it's universal life energy that flows through us and heals us on the way to serving others. Wow. Yeah. Caring of self as caring for others at the same time. Marvelous image. Strongly recommend, if you're feeling drained, use that one, okay? Because it's here all the time. Just breathe it in and breathe it through. All right. So when we get that point where we've been pushed and pulled and drained and whatever, the body probably will give out in some form. Some kind of pain, some kind of distress, some kind of whatever. I usually call the diagnosis a wake-up call. It's time to wake up to what really wants to be happening inside us. And if we're able to get to that point where we can go, okay, those shoulds, and some of you know I have 5 toxic words: should, ought, gotta, musta, have to. Right? When we get to that point where we can go, okay, I don't have to live from that anymore. I can live from the love now. The love that is flowing through me, not from me. I can live from that place of joy that is what is all that is, to experience more of it reflecting back to me. And fortunately, for most of us, that's happening when our kids are adolescents. Or they're just entering it, which means that about the time they're becoming, I got to be myself. I don't want to be you anymore. I got to be myself, right? And that's their job. I get that. That's their job. But it hurts. It can hurt really awfully if they do it not so gently, right? Yeah? Oh my. I can be me, and I can let that love flow through me. And I can know they are fine. I don't have to carry them, as the Gibran quote tells us. You know, I don't have to give them my thoughts. I can't live their life. I can hold them in the love and the light and know that they are fine. Yes? Yes. Well, one of the archetypes of the mother, you know, we've talked about the one that's actually raising kids, but then there are the ones that are supporting the whole community, the matriarch, right? And they're working with whoever, and they're facilitating the land being healthy and the water flowing clearly in the ancient times, and now it's more making sure that all the needs and pieces are in place for the organization. And, well, we've got a few of those in this room. And you guys do a wonderful job. You gals do a wonderful job. You people do a wonderful job, male and female. And that's a form of mothering too. We're doing all the same things we did in the household. And in fact, Margaret Thatcher said, yeah, I can be a great prime minister. I know how to run a household. Mm-hmm. Of course, we're not teaching home economics anymore. So but that way of being in the world, so that all the community that we are feeling led to form and support and hold are thriving, is a form of mothering. And, well, one of the interesting things that happened in the 19th century, I didn't tell you to turn it off, and she didn't either. Yeah. One of the interesting things that happened in the 19th century is that women, through the suffragette movement in part, but the Women's Conference of 1843 in Seneca Falls said, women can be ministers. Oh my goodness. Yeah, and we get Ellen White, We get Mary Baker Eddy, we get Emma Curtis Hopkins, she ended up ordaining 110 people, and so more and more. I didn't know about that until I went through my own 35 to 40 world falling apart and coming back together again, and all of a sudden I'm being drawn to these places where there are these women that are running churches. Who knew that was possible, right? And it's a form of mothering. Now, anyone who saw Sound of Music got a sense of what the Mother Superior's job was in the convent, right? Well, partly. But it was to help her see her dream, climb every mountain, right? Ford every stream till you find your dream. And that's a huge part of the mothering role in community. And so it's totally fitting, and I'm actually kind of glad they didn't have the right kidney for you today, that we get to look at someone who not only did that once, she did that 3 times. 3 different spiritual communities exist because Reverend Marcia Pearce came to the United States and was willing to do that. She went through the training, and she saw the need, and she helped to create, and I know at least 2 of them are still thriving because of the work that she did. She passed a few months back, and at Rhema's request, we're going to do a very brief memorial for Reverend Marcia Pearce. Oh, you have words?
No.
All right.
They're right here.
I hear you.
So here are my words for Marcia, my friend, my mentor, my teacher. And I know that she was served in those roles for a lot of people that are here. Marcia came to the Roseburg Church, and actually my mother was very instrumental in getting Marcia to start that church. My mother wanted a Science and Mind Center in Roseburg. She did not want to have to travel to Eugene, and she was not a part of the Eugene Center. So there were some meetings, and Marcia created that Roseburg Church. And Yes, after creating one in San Jose, after creating one in Modesto. So she was a pastor in Modesto for I don't know how many years, and she was a pastor in San Jose. San Jose for many, many years. Her congregation there in San Jose was over 300. Wow. Over 300 members. And there were 300 to 400 people there every Sunday. And she was instrumental and on the board of Religious Science International. She served on that board. She ran Asilomar for 5 years.
Okay, some people don't know what Asilomar is.
Asilomar is the annual conference, was the annual conference for Religious Science International. They went there for a week every year and held their congress and did their voting, kind of like what we're getting ready to do with FUUF, with the UUA. And Marcia was in charge of that and ran that for 5 years. It was always a rotation of leadership that ran the Asilomar. And she was a phenomenal leader in Religious Science International. She was respected. Her opinions, her thoughts were respected and loved by thousands of people in Religious Science International. And here she comes to Roseburg, ready to retire. And God had other plans. So she started that church in Roseburg. We had 50 people on our first Sunday because there were 30 people that were there, honestly, from Roseburg, and another 20 people that came from the Eugene church at my behest. We all came down to support Marcia. Well, guess what? I never looked back. I stayed. And I was actually, quite a bit of leadership role in Eugene. But I said, this is where my heart wants to go. So my husband and I, Obi and I, served as her practitioners because she did not have any practitioners in the church. She just started it.
And let me interject. A practitioner in religious science is someone who is trained to hold the space of truth, of the presence of power and love, regardless of what appears to be happening.
Exactly. And so Obi and I were trained in that. We had been for many years. Obi was a practitioner for 45 years, and I was a practitioner for 35 years. So we joined that church in an instant on that first Sunday. And about 6 months later, Marcia and I worked closely together with the operations of the church. So every Monday we got together, we did the deposit, we took care of business, we paid bills, all that kind of stuff. And about 6 months in, she said, Rhema, you've taken fourth year, which is the ministerial course in Religious Science International. Why aren't you a minister? And I said, because nobody has given me the opportunity to be a minister. And she said, well, I'm giving you that opportunity. So let's see what you need to do. So I spent a year kind of going over my coursework that I had done many years before to become a minister, and I became her staff minister. And I kind of did what Sally mostly does every Sunday for the Roseburg Church. And I also taught junior church most of the time when we had kids. So I was a very busy lady. But Marcia inspired me to become more of who I am. And she taught me how to do that. This talk that you gave today was absolutely perfect. Absolutely perfect. Because that's what Marcia did. She allowed her energy to come through her to you and to help you create the person you wanted to be. I was the last minister that she trained, but she had trained at least 50 ministers. Wow. And they're out there today with churches. Or they're retired like me.
Can I say that's what we call a grandmother?
Yes, yes. Very, very true. Very truly a grandmother. Yes. She felt it was her calling to sprout ministers through her, to grow ministers through her. And she grew me through her. I spent a year going over coursework that I had done many years before and growing me into becoming a minister. And I have to say that when she moved to Florence, Obi and I helped, load the boxes and bring them over and unload the boxes. And Marcia was so not attached to stuff that she sold all her furniture at an auction before she moved from Roseburg because she didn't want to have anybody have to move it. And she bought a home that was fully furnished. It was a beach house, somebody's beach house. And they sold her that home fully furnished, and she just walked right in and used their towels and their linens, and it didn't matter. And I was amazed by that because I was so attached to my stuff. Anyway, that was just one example of her personal growth. The other thing I would like to say is that she was also my friend, a very, very good friend of mine. And Obie and I spent many, many dinners eating English. She prepared English dishes for us. Like them or not. I have to say, I had beef Wellington and couldn't stomach it. But that is liver on a beef. No, what's beef? What's the
Beef Wellington is the pastry wrapped
Yeah.
around the roast beef.
right? But there was liver on top of the beef.
No
Yeah.
version I've ever seen.
Well, that was Marcia's version.
There's also steak and kidney pie.
Oh, yes. Well, no, thank you. I had that also. So I had many things I've never tasted before. And Marcia and Colin actually lived with us, with Obie and I, for 6 months while their house was being built because they sold their house quite quickly and they had to move somewhere. And so they moved in with us because my mother's apartment was available. And they moved in with us and lived with us for 6 months. And in return for that, we didn't want any rent money. And in return for that, she insisted on cooking us dinner twice a week.
Oh, dear. Oh, dear. Oh, thank you.
So that was Marcia, my friend.
I love it. Is there one gem that you would like everyone to take away when you think of Marcia?
I think of her as a light that will never go out in this world. Truly a light. And, like Reverend Ruth said, a grand mother. Thank you.
Thank you. All right.
Oh, our stained glass. We had tried to get Marcia to come here many, many, many weeks with Donna because she comes from Roseburg. And to dedicate that stained glass with Marcia here, Marcia inspired 4 women and men from the Roseburg Church to create that. Wow. She had purchased some stationery that had this logo with this tree and this river and the leaves, and yes, very similar to that.